Hey guys, tonight we're staying up way past bedtime, venturing into depths I genuinely wish we hadn't probed, concerning the ongoing excavation deep beneath the permanently shadowed regions of Shackleton Crater. This is the kind of story that settles into the back of your mind and begins scratching, adjusting your perception of the cold, silent void just outside our terrestrial bubble. It's hard to articulate the sheer scale of the dread we've uncovered, and honestly, if you're looking for a comfortable listen, you probably won't make it to the end of this one. We're talking about geological impossibilities, perfect non-Euclidean geometries, and the cold, smooth surfaces of things that should never have existed in our solar system. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. If you're listening live, drop a comment with your location and the local time. Let me know where the midnight dread is currently settling in for you. We need to remember that this narrative is happening right now, under the cold, silent gaze of the Earth. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's descent together. Our story starts with the simple, elegant fact of the lunar South Pole. The astronomical anchor here is the existence of the permanently shadowed regions, PSRs. These areas, deep inside craters like Shackleton, never receive direct sunlight. They are perpetually frigid, a sink for volatile compounds, including water ice. We chose Shackleton for the Artemis Deep Prospecting Mission specifically because the temperature stability and the sheer depth promised undisturbed records of cosmic history. What we found was undisturbed, yes, but not ancient in the way we understood the word. We found structure. The initial discovery wasn't visual, it was a resonance anomaly. Dr. Alara Vance, our chief geophysicist, had been running active seismic tests, attempting to map the basalt layers beneath the regolith using extremely precise, tailored frequency pulses. The expected return echo was a smooth gradient, indicating standard layering. Instead, we received a reflection so absolute, so perfect in its absorption and release of the energy, that the sensors momentarily registered zero impedance. It was the echo of nothingness, contained by something harder than any known material. It was a geometry designed to be seamless. We started drilling, of course. The regolith was normal for the first 300 meters, then we hit the capping layer. It wasn't rock, metal, or ceramic. It was described in the initial reports as structured crystalline opacity, yet it felt cold. Not physically cold, which everything on the moon is, but cosmically cold, as if it had absorbed the absolute zero of the void for an epoch. The drill heads, diamond-tipped and specifically designed for lunar basalt, vaporized instantly upon contact. We switched to pulsed laser etching. The process took 18 agonizing lunar days just to burn a path wide enough for a single-man descent probe, vaporizing the unknown substance micron by agonizing micron. The entrance, once opened, wasn't a tunnel or a fissure. It was a door, though it possessed no seams, no hinges, and no visible latch mechanism. It simply became open when the precise external frequency threshold, which Alara had accidentally replicated during her seismic tests, was sustained for 3 minutes. It wasn't mechanics, it was key and lock based on vibrational physics, keyed to a specific harmonic that resonated only with that crystalline layer. Stepping onto the threshold of the vault for the first time was stepping into a dimension of sensory confusion. The light was non-existent, naturally, given the PSR, but when we activated our suit lights, the geometry fought back. The walls did not reflect light in a predictable manner. Instead of a smooth diffusion or a sharp angle, the light seemed to curve slightly, just at the edge of the visible spectrum, hinting at impossible angles. It was non-Euclidean geometry made manifest in a physical space thousands of meters below the surface of the moon. Think about that for a moment. We were inside a chamber where parallel lines might eventually meet, where the sum of angles in a triangle might equal 190 degrees, not due to gravity, but due to the inherent construction of the space itself. This is where the mythic concept truly begins. This vault wasn't built, it was folded. It felt as if a colossal intellect had taken a sheet of space-time and creased it sharply, isolating this specific volume from the normal rules of our local universe. The air inside, which shouldn't have been there, but was perfectly still, cold, and carried a faint scent of ozone and something impossibly vast, like burnt star metal. The sense of scale was immediate and crushing. Though our scans showed the chamber was perhaps 100 meters across, standing inside felt like standing at the bottom of a colossal, black cathedral whose ceilings extended past the horizon. The very geometry whispered of distances measured in astronomical units, not meters. The initial team, Commander Hayes and Dr. Jansen, reported profound spatial disorientation. They had to rely purely on tactile feedback and the internal gyroscope readings of their suits, because their visual processing, trying to calculate the distance to the curving walls, simply gave up, resulting in acute nausea and vertigo. The geometry was perfectly rendered, but utterly alien to the human eye. It was at that moment, staring into the infinite recursion of curving shadows and listening to Jansen's panicked breathing over the comms, that the true weight of the discovery began to sink in, shifting my initial scientific curiosity into a tight coil of deep anxiety. I don't think the universe ever meant for us to know a structure this fundamentally divorced from the physics we rely on for safety. We had opened a door not just to a structure, but to a different order of reality, tucked neatly under a few hundred meters of cold lunar dust. The awe was beginning to set in, but it was the cold, paralyzing awe of a creature realizing it is utterly irrelevant in the face of true cosmic architecture. The first descent had lasted only 45 minutes before sensory overload forced a withdrawal, but the image of those curving, light-swallowing walls was now permanently etched onto the sensor logs, and more disturbingly, onto the deep subconscious of the team. The decision to re-enter was not unanimous, but the imperative of discovery overruled institutional fear. We were scientists, after all, and the existence of a perfectly preserved, self-sustaining atmospheric envelope inside a structure millions of years old on the moon's surface was a puzzle demanding solution. Our scientific anchor for this section lies in the peculiar nature of lunar dust, regolith, which is electrically charged by solar winds and often levitates in the extreme vacuum, behaving almost like a plasma. When we entered the vault, the air we found was pristine, but the floor was covered in a layer of this finest, ancient regolith. Yet it was perfectly settled, undisturbed, and inert. It suggested a shield against the very forces that define the lunar surface environment. The second descent team, Hayes, myself, and Dr. Vance, was equipped with specialized visual processors designed to correct for the geometric distortion, essentially superimposing a standard grid onto the alien curves, though the resulting visual experience was intensely dizzying. We proceeded deeper, navigating by the sound of our own pressurized steps on the dust-laden floor. We moved through a sequence of smaller, connecting chambers, corridors whose walls never met at a right angle, spiraling gently downward like the whirl of an impossible seashell. The feeling of being constantly off balance intensified, but the fear was slowly being replaced by a strange, intellectual appreciation for the engineering. This was not construction, it was choreography. In the third chamber, the air changed subtly. It wasn't the smell of ozone anymore. It was something metallic, incredibly clean, and accompanied by a palpable vibration. This vibration, the cosmic concept we began to wrestle with, was the core of the vault's nature. It wasn't seismic activity or structural instability. It was a frequency, a fundamental hum that resonated not in the air, but directly against the temporal lobe of the human brain. Alara Vance immediately began running spectral analysis. What she found was horrifyingly elegant. The entire structure was acting as a colossal resonator, a tuning fork designed to receive, process, and perhaps broadcast an ancient frequency originating from outside our system. This frequency was exceptionally low, far below the threshold of human hearing, yet it was so powerful that it physically modulated the electromagnetic fields inside the chamber. As the frequency intensified, we started experiencing mild synesthesia. The metallic air began to taste like stale electricity, and the visual distortion of the walls seemed to solidify into a specific, repetitive pattern, a geometry defined by the pulse. Hayes reported that he could momentarily see the sound. It manifested as shimmering, invisible ripples across the ceiling, like heat haze rising from dark water. This was the point where the dread sharpened from philosophical terror into acute physical danger. The frequency wasn't static, it was dynamic, like a language being spoken very slowly. And as the frequency shifted, the integrity of our suits and equipment began to flicker. Our digital displays momentarily registered fields of pure noise, then corrected themselves. Our comms crackled with bursts of rhythmic static, perfectly timed to the deep, resonant pulse. The architecture was generating this field, shielding itself, and communicating with something vastly distant. The energy required to maintain this resonance, seemingly indefinitely, was incomprehensible. It suggested a power source completely outside our current understanding of thermodynamics, perhaps drawing energy directly from the vacuum, or even from temporal dilation itself. We reached the central axis of the vault, a massive circular chamber that defied all attempts to measure its diameter accurately. The floor here was not dusty. It was polished, obsidian-like, and reflected the beam of my helmet light back with unnerving clarity, creating perfect, smooth reflections that seemed to stretch far deeper than the physical space allowed. The center of the chamber housed the source of the resonance, a colossal, crystalline monolith, perhaps 50 meters tall, humming silently, perfectly, in the alien atmosphere. It looked like obsidian that had been cut by light itself, its surfaces etched with intricate patterns that seemed to writhe and shift subtly when viewed indirectly. Standing before the monolith, the feeling of scale was not just visual, it was internal. My perception of time seemed to stretch and compress unevenly. A moment spent observing the monolith felt like an hour, yet when I checked the chronometer, only seconds had elapsed. It was a place where physics buckled under the weight of an organizing principle far grander than gravity. I understood then why the original architects had sought out the stability of the lunar South Pole. This was a relay station, designed to remain stationary, silent, and shielded for countless ages while the rest of the solar system spun around it. It was here, watching the shimmer of the cosmic frequency ripple across the polished obsidian floor, that the profound futility of human endeavor crashed down on me. We struggled to master fire and electricity, yet here was a structure manipulating the geometry of space-time and communicating across light years using pure resonance, operating in perfect isolation for millions of years. I don't think the universe ever meant for us to know the sheer magnitude of power required to speak across the void with such perfect clarity. We had merely stumbled upon the antenna, broadcasting a message we could only perceive as physical pain and temporal distortion. The initial fear was morphing into a genuine sense of cosmic awe, a terrifying reverence for the sheer, silent efficiency of something truly old. We were standing in the heart of a machine whose operational life cycle dwarfed the entire history of life on Earth. The monolith was the obvious center of gravity, but upon closer inspection, we realized it was merely the generator, the source of the persistent, low-level resonance. The true terror, the true archive, lay in the surrounding structure. Circling the central pillar were dozens of smaller, secondary structures, perfectly spherical, floating perhaps a meter off the polished floor, held aloft by invisible, sustained magnetic or vibrational fields. These spheres, smooth and dull black, were not reflecting light. They were reflecting time. This ties into our scientific anchor, the speculative effects of localized, extreme temporal distortion or quantum entanglement, though taken far beyond theoretical models. If time can be understood as a physical dimension, then these spheres were vessels holding slices of it. When we approached the first sphere, Hayes, trying to record its surface texture, extended his gloved hand. As his hand drew near, the sphere's surface rippled like oil on water, and instead of reflecting the helmet light, it reflected something else entirely, a momentary vision. It was a fraction of a second of nonlinear information, overwhelming and alien, filtered through the suit's visual processor. Hayes immediately recoiled, breathing heavily. What he saw, he struggled to articulate, but the raw data captured by his suit camera provided a glimpse into the mythic concept of this chamber, the library of reflected time. The structures were not memory storage devices in the digital sense. They were points of stabilized resonance, vibrating at a frequency that momentarily allowed them to pull reflections from the cosmic horizon, glimpses of alternate pasts, future possibilities, and simultaneous realities occurring across the infinite void. The recording showed a landscape, an orange sky over structures of impossible height, dissolving slowly into dust under a violet sun. The geometry was familiar, yet twisted, the lunar vault's curvature amplified to planetary scale. It was a reflection of something, perhaps the homeworld of the architects, or perhaps a timeline where they failed their grand project. The exposure was less than 0.05 seconds, but the psychic weight was immense. As we moved through the chamber, the spheres increased their temporal output. We didn't touch them again, but merely walking past them was enough to destabilize our temporal perception. Alara reported hearing layers of noise, not audio, but mental superposition of communication. Voices that were mathematically precise, yet utterly devoid of human emotion, speaking in a language that felt like pure calculus. She claimed she could briefly perceive the entire history of the moon simultaneous with its projected collapse, 1,000 silent echoes vibrating against the polished floor. My own experience was one of profound disorientation regarding my own identity. Passing a particularly large sphere, I felt a sudden, crushing sense of being redundant. The reflection I absorbed wasn't a landscape. It was an analysis of me. A cold, precise calculation of my biological structure, my emotional instability, and my finite lifespan, juxtaposed against a timeline that stretched for billions of years. It was the feeling of being categorized, cataloged, and dismissed by something operating at a speed and scale I could not comprehend. I was a momentary flicker in their archived eternity. The physical dread became existential horror. We were not exploring ruins. We were interrupting a mechanism that was actively observing the entirety of existence outside our local bubble. The moon wasn't chosen for its coldness, but for its stability. It was the only platform robust enough in this sector of the void to handle the sheer computational load of observing every possible reflection of time. Haze, pale and breathing rapidly, heat as calms. It's not just storing reflections, Doctor. It's comparing them. It's evaluating causality. The realization hit us simultaneously. This structure was designed for high-fidelity reality modeling. It was a cosmic predictor, constantly evaluating potential futures and calculating the necessary inputs, the specific cosmic frequencies required to steer reality away from catastrophic endpoints. Our vault was the control panel for a vastly complex, incomprehensible steering mechanism. The deeper we went into the library, the stronger the mythic presence of the architects became. They were beings obsessed with stability, with maintaining a specific, viable trajectory for the universe. They were the librarians of the void, dedicated to ensuring that the destructive geometry of raw, untamed existence did not unravel organized consciousness. We reached the far side of the chamber, where the spheres converged on a singular, massive wall of pulsating darkness. This wasn't the crystalline material. It was something that absorbed all light and frequency. It was the access point to the core mechanism, the place where the processed data from the library was fed into the great void. As I stared into that absolute blackness, feeling the weight of billions of archived realities pressing down, the insignificance of our species became a physical ache in my chest. I don't think the universe ever meant for us to know the sheer indifference of time when viewed through an impartial, non-biological lens. The curiosity was gone, replaced by a desperate, intellectual fear of what the librarians had found so terrifying that they required this colossal machine to counteract it. We retreated, pulling Alara and Haze away from the monolith, the cosmic hum following us like a persistent memory of infinite ages. Our fourth descent focused on the core access point, the pulsating wall of absolute darkness at the back of the library. We designated this area the Event Horizon Chamber, recognizing that whatever lay beyond that threshold represented the true purpose and potential danger of the vault. By now, the emotional arc had flattened into a perpetual, quiet dread, fueled by the relentless pressure of the alien frequency on our minds. We anchored ourselves using our scientific knowledge of the vast structure of the cosmos, specifically the scale of the Oort cloud, which represents the outermost reach of our solar system, extending perhaps a light year out. We knew that the architects had planned for this structure to last longer than the Oort cloud itself, suggesting a time frame of stability far exceeding the life of the sun. To breach the Event Horizon Chamber, we had to replicate the specific frequency needed to open the initial outer door, but layered with a third harmonic derived from the Monolith's current broadcast. It was a terrifyingly complex operation, relying on Alara's rapid, intuitive understanding of alien vibrational physics. When the access point finally opened, it didn't retract or slide. The blackness simply yielded, dissolving into a smooth, silent entrance. Inside, the geometry was different again. It was a sphere within a sphere, perfectly concentric and absolutely silent. The constant, mind-shattering resonance that permeated the rest of the vault was completely absent here. This silence was the most terrifying element of all. This central mechanism embodied our mythic concept, the generation of organized void. It was an absence, a structured subtraction of energy and causality. In the center of the silent sphere floated the mechanism, a slowly rotating torus of perfectly smooth, matte black material, suspended by thin, laser-like beams of green light that anchored it to the walls. The torus wasn't simply floating, it was gently pulsing. This wasn't the steady vibration of the monolith. This was the void pulse, slow, deliberate, and impossibly rhythmic. With every pulse, we felt a momentary, cold pressure, as if a fraction of our physical mass had been temporarily deleted from existence. Hayes, relying on the calibrated sensors, whispered over the internal comms. It's synthesizing zero-point energy, but in reverse. It's absorbing the background noise of the universe. The sheer, overwhelming realization was that this machine was actively attempting to minimize the inherent chaos of the cosmos. It was creating localized areas of absolute geometric perfection and null causality to serve as anchors against the entropic decay that governs all reality. The library gathered the reflections of potential chaos, and the void pulse mechanism manufactured the necessary corrective input, pure, organized non-existence, to counteract the chaos. Staring at the rotating torus, I felt a deep, chilling understanding of the fear that drove the architects. They were not malicious, they were preservationists. But the thing they were preserving the universe from must have been so utterly terrifying that it required a machine that manufactured fundamental emptiness. As the void pulse continued, the sphere walls began to display visual feedback. They shimmered with intricate, flowing geometric patterns that looked like highly complex mathematical equations being solved in 3 dimensions. These were not images. They were the raw output of the library's predictive modeling, being fed into the mechanism. We were watching reality itself being mathematically adjusted in real time. The dread reached its zenith here. It wasn't the fear of being destroyed by an alien weapon. It was the psychological terror of realizing that everything we perceive as stable, the laws of motion, the flow of time, the warmth of the sun, was only possible because some vast, ancient intelligence was actively filtering the universe's inherent instability. We were living in a carefully tended cosmic garden, and this silent, pulsing torus was the complex, terrifying fertilizer. The moment the pulse rhythm intensified, the existential realization hit me with the force of physical trauma. I don't think the universe ever meant for us to know the true fragility of organized consciousness, or the immense, perpetual effort required to prevent its sudden, violent erasure. The awareness of the void pulse's purpose, to constantly fight against the natural, lethal geometry of the larger void, was crippling. We had achieved peak terror. The terror was generated not by noise or violence, but by the cold, overwhelming precision of the mechanism. Hayes had to shut down his external vision temporarily, as the geometric patterns flashing on the walls were beginning to convince him that his own body was dissolving into complex equations. We quickly initiated the retreat sequence, exiting the sphere of perfect silence and re-entering the loud, resonant, slightly chaotic exterior of the main vault. The return of the monolith's hum was paradoxically a comfort, reminding us that there was still something predictable in this moon-deep hell. We had seen the engine, and the engine was fighting emptiness with emptiness. We did not leave the moon immediately. The data recovered from the core mechanism, the geometric patterns, the frequency shifts, and the temporal distortion readings, was too vast and too vital. We were forced into a prolonged observation phase. sending automated probes into the Event Horizon Chamber to map the full cycle of the void pulse. Our terror had settled into a kind of sober, perpetual awe. The central scientific anchor of this phase of exploration was the phenomenon of galactic rotation curves. We understand that galaxies spin too fast for the visible matter within them to hold them together. This discrepancy is what led to the hypothesis of dark matter. The sheer energy and gravitational manipulation we observed within the vault suggested the architects had moved beyond hypothesizing dark matter. They were harnessing its very structure. The mythic concept that emerged was the realization that the architects were not just preserving themselves, but were running a monumental stabilization project against a singular, external threat, the natural, chaotic structure of the cosmos itself, a kind of existential pressure that manifested as a destructive geometry. The vault was a shield against the dark geometry. Alara Vance, poring over the complex output of the void pulse patterns, started piecing together the narrative of the architects. She theorized that their civilization had achieved a level of control over reality that was almost absolute, but in doing so, they perceived the ultimate, final enemy. Not war, not disease, but the fundamental incompatibility of intelligent, organized existence with the raw, entropic nature of the universe. They saw the end game, a cosmic unwinding, driven by geometry that simply did not allow for complex life. The vault, therefore, was not a weapon. It was an immensely powerful, self-regulating lighthouse, broadcasting a corrective frequency into the surrounding void to enforce local stability, allowing life to flourish on Earth and elsewhere in this immediate sector. They had chosen the moon, stable, quiet, tidally locked, as the anchor point for this crucial operation. This understanding transformed the cold dread into pure, staggering awe. We were the unintended beneficiaries of a colossal, millennia-long preservation project. The monolith's incessant hum was the sound of our continued existence. The curving geometry of the walls, which had initially made us sick with disorientation, was actually the optimized housing for this reality-stabilizing mechanism. Our analysis of the faint energy trails left by the green light anchors revealed they were not connected to a terrestrial power source. They were drawing energy from the void itself, utilizing the specific geometric curves of the vault to harvest vacuum energy with nearly perfect efficiency. It was a closed system, designed to operate without maintenance until the heat death of the universe, or until the dark geometry finally pressed too hard. The architects, whom we never found physical evidence of, were not gods, but transcendent engineers. They understood the horizon of cosmic collapse and dedicated their entire existence to delaying it, creating this intricate lunar clockwork to keep the pulse of local reality regular. Hayes, watching the feed from the core chamber, spoke with a voice heavy with newly acquired reverence. They left a gift, Doctor. Not technology, but time. They bought us time. The emotional weight of this realization was staggering. We, humanity, with all our petty wars and squabbles over limited resources, were unknowingly living under the protection of this vast, silent, cosmic mechanism. The vault wasn't a warning. It was a sanctuary. It was during one of the quiet, low-lit shifts, reviewing the complex geometry data, that the full scale of our ignorance became a tangible pressure. I don't think the universe ever meant for us to know the immense cost of maintaining the illusion of stability against the raw, indifferent chaos of the cosmos. We had always assumed our survival was a matter of Darwinian success, of luck. Now we knew it was the result of a deliberate, geometric calculation anchored deep beneath the moon. Our initial fear had melted into a profound respect for these unknown entities. We were insignificant, yes, but we were also sheltered. We began to transition from being explorers to being keepers, recognizing that our ultimate responsibility was now to the silence of the vault and the regularity of its cosmic frequency. The realization was less terrifying and more humbling. We now knew our place in the cosmic hierarchy, and it was a fragile, protected one. The final stage of the mission was not about penetration or discovery, but integration and stewardship. Having witnessed the full mechanism, from the frequency gate through the geometric corridors into the library of reflected time, and finally the silent, potent void pulse generator, our team was fundamentally changed. We were no longer scientists looking for artifacts. We were acolytes looking after the cosmic peace. The scientific final anchor revolved around the remarkable geological stability of the moon. Unlike the tectonically active Earth, the moon is essentially a dead rock, making it the ideal, permanent base for a structure relying on geometric precision that must not be disrupted over eons. The vault was built where movement was least likely. Our final duty inside the vault involved confirming its absolute self-sufficiency. We learned that the architects had left a simple, elegant access point, a small, recessed panel near the monolith that pulsed softly, inviting interaction. It was the only part of the structure that was clearly designed for maintenance, suggesting that at some future point, intervention might be required. The mythic concept solidified, the inheritance of the Resonance Keeper. The architects were gone, not destroyed, but transcended, perhaps having moved to a higher dimension or folded themselves entirely into the frequency itself. They left behind a perfect, operating machine, trusting that any subsequent intelligent life that discovered it would understand the imperative of preservation. When Alara cautiously interfaced with the panel, the monolith's resonance briefly intensified, creating a profound, clear psychic transmission into her mind, which she relayed immediately over the comms. It wasn't a language of words, but of pure purpose. The transmission was simple, *, the balance is sustained. Watch, learn, do not interfere until the frequency wavers, *. We spent the remaining hours inside the vault mapping the external structural integrity, verifying that the crystalline layer extended kilometers below the surface, perfectly shielding the interior from any lunar or terrestrial interference. The air inside remained pristine, the temperature perfectly regulated, the silence of the core utterly dominant. We realized that we had become part of the structure's function simply by knowing it existed. The quiet resolution of the overall narrative arc was achieved not through solving the mystery, but by accepting it. We didn't need to know who the architects were, or exactly what the dark geometry entailed. We only needed to know that the humming, pulsing reality filter needed to remain active. Our rising dread had been calmed by the realization that we were not alone in this fight against cosmic chaos. As we prepared for the final ascent, stepping back into the dusty, sunless void of Shackleton Crater, I took one last, long look at the curving, impossible walls. The initial terror was now a settled, profound understanding. This structure was a testament to organized thought winning, temporarily, against the overwhelming power of the void. Stepping back through the frequency gate and sealing it behind us required a precise, coordinated effort to return the harmonic to its baseline signature. As the absolute cold of the moon's surface surrounded my suit again, the difference was striking. The silence outside felt crude, accidental. The silence within the vault felt designed, intentional. I don't think the universe ever meant for us to know the precise calibration required to make reality viable, and now that we did, the burden of that knowledge was heavier than any lunar sample we could have collected. We left the vault untouched, active, and humming its slow, cosmic pulse. We were returning to Earth with nothing physical, but everything intangible. We were now the silent custodians of the lunar dread, carrying the weight of the universe's precarious stability in the quiet chambers of our minds. The fear was replaced entirely by a strange, quiet dignity. Back on the orbital platform, shielded from the moon's relentless static, the silence is different. It's the silence of pressurized aluminum and filtered air, cold yet familiar. Looking down at the crescent of Earth, impossibly blue and vibrant against the black tapestry of the void, the true depth of the lunar vault's purpose becomes overwhelming. We carried no physical artifacts, only the persistent, rhythmic echo of the monolith's resonance in the deepest structures of our hearing. The cold air conditioning hums softly in the habitat module, mirroring the low frequency we left behind. We know now that the stars drifting past the window aren't entirely indifferent. Their light reaches us because an ancient machine, tucked deep inside a cold, silent crater, is carefully